As many of you know, it is the 3-year anniversary of Dobbs, the atrocious decision from the United States Supreme Court to eliminate the constitutional right to obtain an abortion. I personally can't believe it's been 3 years. I feel like it was just yesterday that Roe v. Wade was overturned at the behest of the conservative Republican right-wing religious right. It was done. The useful idiots were the ultra-conservative majority on the United States Supreme Court. And they're the ones that basically got the overturning of Roe v. Wade across the finish line with the Dobbs decision. There has been a proliferation of just wild and horrific results. Women dying, women being refused medical treatment and necessary care. There have been a proliferation of horrific and draconian laws across the United States as a result of Dobbs. We've got fetal heartbeat laws in states like Florida and Georgia. They've resulted in things like Adriana Smith, a young African-American woman in Georgia whose body was used simply as a vessel for the delivery of her child via an emergency C-section. Adriana was declared brain dead, but they kept her body alive on life support so that her son, with hydrocephalus, with water on the brain, could be born weighing 1 pound and a couple of ounces. Currently in the neonatal intensive care unit, uncertain future. And her body was just an incubator to make sure that the hospital staff didn't run afoul of Georgia's fetal heartbeat abortion law. I mean, that's a pretty horrific and yet completely standard example of what has happened since Dobbs. There's a certain kind of subset of a post-Dobbs era that I wanted to discuss with you today because it's terrifying. And it's something that I spoke about at length on a Substack Live that I did today with my good friend and scholar, Leah Littman. She's an incredible author, and she's also a very thoughtful legal analyst. And we talked about this idea of fetal personhood. And the reason why I wanted to kind of briefly speak about that with you is because if you think it's a crazy idea, you got another thing coming, because it's actually found its way into the regular discourse, legally speaking, about reproductive rights. And also I wanted to highlight the fact that fetal personhood, this idea that there is legal rights afforded to unborn persons, that was a part of Project 2025. Fetal personhood was a mission of Project 2025. One of the goals in Project 2025 was to, quote, create a federally recognized fetal personhood, a once fringe pro-life legal theory that has gained traction since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Fetal personhood laws refer to a category of laws that grant legal protection to unborn persons. So, here we go. Since Dobbs, we've had the following cases that have addressed fetal personhood. In 2024, an Alabama Supreme Court case, LePage versus Center for Reproductive Medicine, PC. In that case, the Alabama Supreme Court found that fertilized embryos, prepared for IVF, were persons even before they were implanted in a woman's uterus. Stop. I have a daughter. She was born via IVF. I am forever grateful for the miracle that is my daughter. I am grateful for the miracle of science, and that science and medicine were able to make me a mom. I will tell you this. I have cryogenically frozen embryos that are currently being maintained. I don't intend on using those cryogenically frozen embryos. I'm about to turn 50. If and when those embryos are destroyed, have I now committed murder? Have I done something for which I will face criminal or civil liability? I guess it ends up depending on what state those embryos are going to be located, right? And what are the laws of that state? If you're in Alabama, the Alabama Supreme Court found that fertilized embryos prepared for IVF are persons even before they were implanted in a uterus. So I'm in Alabama and I destroy my embryos that were prepared for IVF, I guess that means I've committed murder. It sounds crazy and wackadoo, but folks, this is where we are heading in a post-Dobbs era. These are the types of rulings from laws that we are getting in a post-Dobbs era. The Alabama legislature, quote, quickly passed legislation to allow doctors to continue providing IVF treatment without liability, but the court's decision indicated how far personhood could go. Multiple bills recognizing fetal personhood have now been proposed or implemented in other states, including Colorado, Georgia, and Iowa. Now listen, it's not just on a state level. Not on a state level. Here's the federal implications. In January of 2023, Representative Alexander Mooney introduced the Life at Conception Act to the House of Representatives. This bill would have Congress recognize that the right to life begins at conception. In January of 2025, Congressman Eric Burleson introduced H.R. 722, which would implement equal protection under the 14th Article of Amendment to the Constitution for the right of life to each born and pre-born human person. And then Trump's Executive Order 14168, defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth to the federal government. That orders the federal government to recognize that sex is binary, right? It's either male or female. However, in the executive order, the language says that female or male is pertaining to a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces either the large reproductive cell for females or the small reproductive cell for males. Speaker Mike Johnson, pro-life Republican himself, has made statements stating that Trump's executive order was intended to define life beginning at conception rather than at birth. It's real, people. It's very real. They are trying to get to a point where fetal personhood is a recognized legal status, that before a child is born, that child is the cells are a person. Conception people, right? I haven't seen any that say it's got to be a requisite number of cells, but the reality is it's at conception, right? How are you going to define that? Here's the case, right? What about birth control? We've already seen what the Republicans have done post-Dobbs, going after mifepristone, the abortion medication pill. We've seen what they've done in terms of, trying to restrict access to birth control. I've always said that birth control is the next frontier when it comes to stuff after Dobbs, just like right now we're seeing this fetal personhood argument being advanced. In 2022, the state of Georgia determined that residents could list an unborn child as a dependent on their taxes via an interpretation of that state's Living Infants Fairness and Equality Act of 2019, which prohibits abortion after 6 weeks of gestation. Think about that. Georgia's 6-week bill has now created the ability for an unborn child to be declared independent and a dependent, not independent, but a dependent on their taxes. In 2023, a Florida woman who was in prison argued that her unborn child was unlawfully detained. I mean, how much farther is this going to go? How much farther is this going to go? I will say this. The Republicans are pretty damn good about their hypocrisy, right? And they're pretty damn good about playing the victim and trying to villainize other people instead of having accountability and having to have responsibility for promoting, pushing, and getting bills passed into law that create barriers to reproductive rights and reproductive access. Here's a prime example. Florida Congresswoman, because it's always Florida, right, people? Florida Congresswoman Cammack, C-A-M-M-A-C-K. She had last year in May of 2024, she had to be rushed to the emergency room because she was told by her doctor that she had an ectopic pregnancy. On May 21st of 2024, she woke up bleeding heavily, pulled out a pregnancy test that came with the ovulation kit she ordered off of Amazon. It was positive. Her doctor confirmed she might be miscarrying. There was no treatment to offer. The doctor told her, you have, on May 31st, 2024, you have an embryo implanted where the fallopian tube meets the uterus. That is considered a cornual ectopic pregnancy. And according to Kat Cammack, her doctor said, quote, if this ruptures, it'll kill you. Medical professionals said surgery to remove the embryo put her at risk of losing her uterus, so she opted for a shot of methotrexate. This shot, this drug, blocks folic acid needed by the embryo to grow. So when she goes to the hospital in Florida and she says, I need this shot of methotrexate to help me expel my ectopic pregnancy, the staff and the doctors were hesitant to give her the medication. Why? Because in Florida, it is a 6-week abortion ban. And even though she was pretty much at 5 weeks of pregnancy, understandably, the doctors and the staff at this hospital in Florida, for fear of civil and criminal liability, they were like, we can't do this for you. We don't know what to do. So what does Kat Cammack do? She pulls up the state law on her phone for hospital workers to read. She calls the governor's office late at night for help, but no one picked up. Eventually, she got her methotrexate shot. I'll add a footnote here. Kat Cammack is presently pregnant, and she is due to deliver in July, and we'll get to that in a minute. But she was able to successfully get her shot that she needed to be able to basically terminate her ectopic pregnancy. Now, the Florida ban took effect May 1st of 2024. So this was literally just a few weeks before she had this experience at a hospital. So Kat Cammack, you would think, because remember, we've been having these conversations, right? Where we say, oh, well, listen, Republicans just kind of need to go through it themselves. They need to suffer a little bit, or they need to go through the experience to have empathy to understand why these bills and these laws that they're passing that are draconian and horrible, why they are draconian and horrible. I hate to say it, but sometimes we think that people need to go through bad stuff. They need to have the find out part of the fuck around to be able to know what they're doing is wrong. Oh, but no, not with Kat Cammack. Let me be clear. Kat Cammack is the kind of woman who is an enemy to women. She is not a friend to women. Not a friend to women. She went to the hospital, and here's what happens. She doesn't fault the Florida law for her experience at the hospital. She accuses the left, us Democrats, right? She accuses the left of scaring medical professionals with messaging that stressed that they could face criminal charges for violating the law. She says those efforts gave medical staff reason to fear giving drugs even under legal circumstances. Quote, it was absolute fear-mongering at its worst. So, Kat Cammack, instead of actually saying, you know what, maybe these types of laws that I have been pushing in my home state of Florida, maybe these types of laws that are clearly, because I don't know about you, but who the hell knows that you're pregnant at 6 weeks, could be a missed period because you're going through something. Maybe you're not pregnant. Maybe you are. Nobody knows at 6 weeks if you're pregnant. But instead of Kat Cammack saying, you know what, these laws are draconian, these laws are bad, these laws create unnecessary stress on the woman, the mother, the partner, the spouse, the family. It creates unnecessary stress of liability on the hospital staff and the physicians and the doctors, etc. Instead of saying, we made a mistake, I went through this myself, I understand that these laws are construed and drafted in a way that is so vague and broad that it could create a fear, understandably, about interpretations of this. Instead of owning that, you know what she did? She blames the left. She blames the left for fear-mongering instead of just being honest and true and saying that it's actually not the left's fault. Dr. Allison Haddock, the president of the American College of Emergency Physicians, says that it's actually common for doctors in states with abortion bans like that to be worried, quote, because their clinical judgment is going to be questioned, right? It says they are worried whether their clinical judgment will stand should there be any prosecution. Early pregnancy care, including instances of ectopic pregnancies, which is a, quote, medically complicated space, has uncertainty in diagnoses and treatment plans. It's common. It's a real stress point for a lot of our physicians, she says. Makes sense, right? It makes sense that in a post-Dobbs world, where we have this proliferation of these laws and these anti-abortion bans, that there would be confusion and uncertainty. I don't care what the right wants to say about how, oh, but there's exceptions. Because, Kat Cammack says that, right? I support the exceptions of rape and incest and health of the mother. But when push came to shove, she successfully got the treatment that she needed. Lord knows the fuss that she made to be able to get it, right? I kind of feel like she is. But she had the gall in this Wall Street Journal article to say the following. Her biggest takeaway? She was lucky to go through the ordeal with a network of people to lean on. What happens to women who don't have a car? What happens to the women who don't have their doctor's cell phone number? Hell, do they have a doctor? What happens to them? Kat Cammack, why don't you save your feigned fear or worry or concern about other women for people who actually think that you're telling the truth about that fear and that worry? How about the people that can't afford their reproductive care? How about the women that live in states where, I don't know, they don't have access to reproductive rights at all? How about the women that can't afford to, I don't know, travel somewhere else? I mean, listen, you got on a plane and you went from Florida to DC back to Florida. I mean, how about those women? If you really cared about them, you wouldn't support these bills. What you would do is you would say, I made a mistake. These laws are wrong. Fetal heartbeat bills are wrong. 6-week abortion bans are wrong. I went through an experience myself. And I understand that there's fear and confusion. But no, Kat Cammack has decided that the fear-mongering on the left is the reason why she had such a bad experience at the hospital for her ectopic pregnancy. I am thrilled for Kat Cammack that she has a pregnancy that is due to, come to pass, as in she's supposed to have her baby in mid-August. During Congress's scheduled month-long recess. Good for her. I hope the baby is born without complications and the baby is healthy. And I hope Kat Cammack is healthy and she has no complications. But like I said, she is no friend of women. When asked about if she supported the idea proposed by 2 female lawmakers, by the way, bipartisan, this is a bipartisan idea or bill. These 2 female lawmakers had babies, and it was to allow remote votes for a few weeks after the child is born. Kat Cammack, you want to know what her response was? I got to read it for you because it was so typically her. Quote, I don't support it. A lot of moms have to be right back at work, right back to work. I knew what I signed up for when I got elected. Okay. Folks, be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. You're never going to get accountability or any type of honesty about this from Kat Cammack, will you? She's just going to blame the left. And you know what? It's not our loss. She was never, ever going to be an advocate for women at this point. Catch you on the other side. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.